In the previous video, James divorces and walks out of Kelly's life. In this story, we watch the aftermath of the divorce from Kelly's perspective. Now let's start with the story. If you are here, don't forget to hit that like button and send us a hi in the comment section. Sitting on the floor, watching James walk off with the two witches was the lowest I had ever felt in my entire life. You can't sit there all day, lady. You're blocking the courtroom door. I looked up to see an officer of the court standing above, looking down at me with clear disdain. I dearly wanted to tell him to go to hell. I just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Yeah, whatever. I managed to stand, taking my first tentative steps toward the exit in the car park where my mother waited to take me home. That's when the full implications hit me square in the face. Home? I wasn't going home, ever. I now no longer had a home or car. But most of all, I no longer had a husband. It had all been stolen away from me. Stolen by those two damn women. I thought to myself as I trudged out into the glare of the mid-morning sunshine. Sunshine that made me feel worse, mocking me with its bright shining rays. I thought I'd cried myself out until I saw James and those two witches drive off laughing with each other, then turning to see my mother standing beside her car with her arms folded and shaking her head in disgust. I broke down and cried again as Mum told me to get my 304, but in the car. I didn't think my life could get worse, but Mum was making it her mission in life to rid me of that delusion. I sat in silence, staring out my window. Thoughts came back to me of the afternoon Mum came home from talking to James. I had done as my mother had ordered me. I wanted to use the bathroom, but Mum had told me to sit with my legs together and head down. I almost peed myself waiting, too afraid that Mum would come storming in the door and I wasn't where she told me to be. I sat there crying to myself with frightened anticipation of my mother's return. I dearly wanted to avoid having to look at Mum's face and listen to her derision. The alternative was more frightening than the coming confrontation. Even though I had never been able to win any arguments with my mother, it was marginally better than being ostracized and left completely on my own. I knew I couldn't go anywhere for I had nowhere to go. If I walked out, I'd be sleeping in the park. I'd already tried to talk to Carol and Pam, both having told me to screw off and die. Sue just hung up on me without even talking. Beth had no idea what I was on about. She just giggled and told me to home pump blood into his second brain and everything would be okay. James was right. Beth doesn't even live on the same planet as everyone else. Beth's clueless advice was after my call to Carol and Pam, who proceeded to berate me for destroying their lives with my arrogant stupidity. Carol called me every name under the sun, telling me I had crap for brains and too weak-willed for not being able to control my husband. I had to agree I was stupid, but was quickly concluding that it wasn't for the reason they cited. I was in a class moron for ever getting back into their clutches. My life was hell, and up until now I couldn't see why everyone was telling me it was all my doing. All I wanted was a perfect marriage. What was wrong with that? I was starting to get nauseous from having to agree with everyone who told me those two were trouble. Mum was right when she told me they were one step away from being 304s when she pulled me out of school and away from Carol's group. I didn't see it. Back then they just seemed way cool and in control of their lives. Now I don't think they understood a damn anything but how to manipulate others. I realized this only when it's way too late to do anything about it. I laughed spitefully when Pam told me James was suing every one of them for destroying his marriage. We were sitting at a set of lights as Mum's voice pulled a halt to my introspection. I was still looking dejectedly out the passenger window. I'll give you one thing, Kelly. When you do something, you go all out and do it properly. No half measures for my gullible daughter. I thought I made a hash of my marriages, but you have made a bloody art form out of it. What could I say? Nothing. So I sat there crying and tried not to listen to the barrage of abuse my mother was throwing at me. Your father is ropeable. I thought he was going to have a heart attack when he found out exactly what you had done to James and your marriage. I'll be surprised if he doesn't put the paddle to your butt. There was a moment's silence, and I was just beginning to think she'd run out of steam. I always thought that mothers were there to console their children when things went bad. Well, not my mother. I have never heard my mother swear at any time in my life, so what she said next rocked me to the core. If he does decide to beat some sense into that stupid brain of yours, don't you be expecting me to step in to save it. I'll be damn well urging him on. She clipped me behind the ear and I winced. You listening to me, you stupid girl? If it was left up to me and I thought I could get away with it, I'd have you bent over at the waist with head and hands locked in stocks, on display in the local park, for anyone to use who has a mind. You want to be a lowlife maggot? Then we'll do it right. How about we pimp your butt out to pay that damn detective's bill? Least that way your dad and I won't have to dive into our holiday savings. We'll work out how you're going to pay that stupid brain fart off at a later date. I shivered at the mental picture her statements conjured up as the tears streamed down my face. She seemed to take a breath and settle down, and then she couldn't help herself. She ranted on. There is still something James and I both would like to know. What in God's name were you thinking? You certainly weren't thinking with your head when you signed that ridiculous codicil. How on earth could you not see that James was giving you every chance to get your stuff together? But no, your soggy, lust-saturated brain decided to ignore all the signs. Stop it, Mom. I screamed at the top of my voice, almost to the point of going hoarse. I'm sorry, okay? I coughed and wailed at her stoned-faced anger. The fresh torrent of tears was overwhelming me. I slapped my hands over my ears as Mom continued her tirade. We women complain about men thinking with their genitals, damn it, child. You certainly put paid to that argument, didn't you? More like blew that one right out of the water. Let me guess, you were fantasizing about screwing up a storm? Getting excited over the prospect of your husband working his butt off to support your sexual perversions? I'll ask you again, Kelly, what the hell were you thinking? Even if I could stop crying long enough to answer her, I doubt that I could have made a sane reply. I'd asked myself that question so many times now that I've just made myself even more confused. I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. I managed to finally whisper as the tears dropped off my chin and soaked my blouse. I bundled myself into a tighter ball against the passenger door and wept. Mom just shook her head as she pulled into the drive. Turning off the car, she snapped. Get out. I want you out of those clothes. I have a ratty old house dress you can wear. Then you can get to work scrubbing floors and walls. The windows need a good going over, and both the bathrooms can do with a thorough dose of elbow grease. I knew this was coming from the conversation I'd already had with Mom. I guess I can forget about my next appointment to get my hair and nails done. I winced from within at what my mother was saying. All I could say was, yes, Mom. Moreover, it burned me to the core. I again burst out crying as I remembered the conversation when I found out that Mom knew what I had done. I have no one to blame for that since I had basically spilled the beans myself. James hadn't helped, however, by putting me on speaker. That was nothing to what Mom was throwing at me now. But then James hadn't shown her the photos. It was my stupidity in thinking if I fought hard enough, then James would see that I loved him and wouldn't want a divorce. My solicitor warned me it was better not to contest it. Again, my arrogance showed through. I didn't think about the consequences of James handing the photos over into evidence. I honestly didn't believe he'd do it. When they came out in court, I knew my butt was fried when I saw Mom glaring at me from across the room. I wanted to shrivel up and disappear. That hurt. It really did. I felt as though James had betrayed me to my mother. When James picked up the phone, I was so relieved he might be mellowing out and coming around wanting to talk. I didn't want to give him time to hang up before I had a chance to talk to him. And then he asked me that stupid question. Who is it you don't want to know, Kelly? I couldn't understand what he was saying until Mom spoke up. I felt like my stomach had turned to a ball of ice. I don't understand men at all. Give them what they want and they call you a 304. Don't do what they want and you're a frigid witch. Mom was asking me what I was thinking. I'd like to know what the hell James was thinking. What's wrong with spicing up your sex life? Carol said that men are interested in only one thing, and I still agree. All the other husbands hopped on the wagon without any fuss. But not my doofus. He has to lumber me with damn morals. We were walking from the car into the house. You won't be needing anything dressy for any time soon, child, but I will have to get you something. Until then, you can wear my old stuff that I was going to send to St. Vinny's op shop. At the first opportunity, I'll go shopping to buy you some new clothes. But don't go getting excited. To start with, I'll get you some white cotton full briefs and plain cotton bras. That should hold you for a while. I look at her horrified at having to wear granny pants and out-of-style clothes. Don't be giving me that look, Kelly. But those clothes are 20 years out of date, Mom. Not to mention that they are threadbare. Mom scoffed. That's nothing, dearie. The clothes I'll be buying will make a nun wince in sympathy for you. You'll be lucky if I allow you to get naked to have a shower. I'm seriously thinking of getting you one of those veiled hijab and kaftans the Muslim women wear, neck to ankle until you can afford to get out on your own. Or how about I go looking for potato sacks in your size? Your days of high fashion are toast until you get yourself back on your feet and are paying your own way. James and I have been talking, and it seems to me that your father and I have a small responsibility for the destruction you brought to your marriage. I know I wasn't taking much notice by then, and most of what Mom was saying was now going in one ear and out the other. It showed when I asked, "What's that supposed to mean?" Mom shook her head and pushed me in through the front door. "You best start learning to listen, you ungrateful wretch." I hate it when she calls me a child, and I hate it even more when she uses that name as well. When have you ever worked for anything in your entire life? Kelly, I know your father and I gave you everything, and from what James has said, he continued that trend. You have no appreciation of what it's like to fight for what you have. Well, you're going to be taking a crash course in humility. Thrift wouldn't hurt either, along with community appreciation and service, until you can grow a few more gray cells in that stupid brain of yours. When we got into the house, Mom had me start with what I can only relate as, this is your first module in being a useful member of society and a decent human being. Housekeeping 101 is something you need to learn. I thought you were at least proficient at tending your home. I now find out James did 90% of the work around the house. Mom set me to task cleaning, dusting, washing, and just before Dad came home, I had to make dinner and set the table. After I put the casserole in the oven, I had about an hour before Dad was due home. So I went to my room to brood. What century does Mom live in? Everyone knows women have shed the domestic scene. Her damn generation got us out of the kitchen and into controlling our own destinies. Now she's trying to chain me back to the sink, probably barefoot and pregnant if it was her decision. I saw Dad sitting in the dining room reading his paper. Normally, he would be glad to see me, but this evening he kept reading, ignoring my dinner preparations. Dad? My father didn't look up, though a sour expression slid across his face. I had the impression he'd just stepped in dog poop as he continued reading. Dinner is on the table. I mentioned hesitantly. All thought of eating vanished as I stood there, unsure of anything that pertains to my father and what he thinks. He folded his paper, got up and walked straight past me without saying a word. Dinner was a cold and silent affair. I sat in my seat and ate without tasting my food, staring at the flower arrangement I'd so carefully and thoughtfully placed in the center of the table. Mom and Dad conversed on the day's events, but totally ignored my presence. I could have been a statue for all their concern. If I thought I could get away with it, I'd have got up and taken my dinner into my room to eat it alone. As far as they were concerned, I didn't exist. By the end of the meal, Mom finally acknowledged me, but only as a domestic. Clear away the table, do the washing up, don't you dare use the dishwasher, and make sure the kitchen is in pristine condition. You can then go to your room. They both left me at the table without saying anything more. Dad still hadn't said a word to me since he found out what I had done, and it was killing me. I was shattered. I have always been Daddy's little girl, and now I wasn't even someone he wanted to be in the same room with, let alone converse. If Mom's tirades weren't bad enough, Dad not talking to me at all was even worse. Somehow I wished he would flog me and get it over with. That would be more preferable to this invisibility I was suffering. I heard them talking, and from a few words I did hear, James was part of their conversation. I knew better than to eavesdrop, even though I dearly wanted to know what James was doing. I just kept to my chores, before retiring to my room to cry once more. Every time I thought I dropped to my lowest, there was something else to pound my self-esteem down even further into the quagmire which had appeared around me. Mom sent me grocery shopping and gave me only enough money for shopping, and if I was frugal, a taxi home. If I was lucky and caught a sale, I might even have enough for a coffee in the food court at the shopping center. But when I finished at the shops, I only had enough for a short black with what was left. I knew I'd be walking home since I didn't have enough for the taxi. I sat with my trolley of food watching people milling around content in their perfect little lives. It made me glum. If it weren't for the fact I felt even worse at home, I'd have got up and left. My coffee arrived and I took a tentative sip when out of the corner of my eye I saw the blonde-haired woman who had taken James from me. I couldn't believe it. It was as if fate was conspiring against me. If my life isn't bad enough, to have to run into her again so soon was worse than death. She was standing not more than 3 meters away from me. She was laughing as she spoke to some other shoppers. A cold knife sliced through my heart and my head pounded. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched her throwing her hair around in jovial conversation. Her life was perfect and mine was now hell. I had to reluctantly admit she was beautiful. The mass of golden blonde hair streaming down her back belied her mental acuity. I dyed my hair for James, knowing he liked blonde hair. That's one reason I did it. That, and the fact I got more attention from most men. That other women comment about not being a true blonde was still ringing in my ears each night as I tried to go to sleep and forget. The stinging reminder of our battle at the courthouse left me in little doubt this woman was Noon's fool. When it came to acid tongues, I believe that she's give my mother a run for her money. I felt like getting up and scratching her eyes out, but since my run-in with her, I gathered that she would be just as formidable physically as she was mentally. She towered over me, and I felt intimidated. Losing to her in a physical fight wouldn't do my self-esteem much good, so I chose to sit quietly and observe her instead. The first thing I noticed was the total lack of arrogance she had displayed at the courthouse, while displaying grandeur and poise to grace a princess. I know what I am and know I'm beautiful. Even if these clothes Mom is forcing me to wear don't do me justice, however, as James so irritatingly put it, I'm not in this woman's league. In the past, I tended to dominate and lord it over those around me with my physical aura. I learned early in life all I need to do was bat my eyelids at men, and I had them instantly wrapped around my little finger. I was in a quandary. What has happened to my sex appeal? Where did I go so wrong? This woman and her red-headed cohort slashed me to ribbons to a point. I now have nightmares with the confrontation replaying in my sleep. I wake up crying in the night and find it hard to regain a level of calmness enough to drop back off to sleep again. I no longer feel confident in anything I do. I find I'm continually seeking reassurance from Mom that I have done whatever it was right. This woman, who on the surface seemed to just accept others as equals, has that air of confidence I once felt. I couldn't understand how or why she could or would do that, when she obviously had the ability to have everyone falling around her to do her bidding. I tried to remember her name, and it frustrated me that I couldn't bring it to mind. I'm sure James called her by name. I knew the red-headed woman was Sally or Sarah or something, but this one eluded me completely. I found it hard to believe I wasn't listening to what he said. I remembered he and Mom accused me of not listening to anything which didn't fit with my perception of the world I lived in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't listen? Is that so bad? To dismiss trivialities. Obviously, these observations weren't trivial in the least, and they have affected my life dramatically. I felt sick with the notion that I just may have had my head jammed up my butt to my shoulders. I couldn't deal with these thoughts any longer, so I got up and left, feeling further depressed at the thought of my long walk home carrying my heavy shopping bags. I sought Mom out and told her I was home. Any idea of praise for doing a good job went out the door when she told me it was my duty from now on, and I'd be reprimanded if it wasn't done to her satisfaction. You took way too long shopping. You should have been back hours ago. Now get into the basement and clear all the stuff down there out to the garage. Stack it neatly so your father doesn't have to move it around to get to his car. Once you're finished, you can scrub every surface in the basement spotless. As I walked off to do as I was told, Mom quipped, "You also need cooking lessons. Last night's meal was barely digestible. How James ever put up with your slop, I'll never know. I'll take full responsibility for that one. I should have had you in the kitchen teaching you how to look after your husband who was breaking his back looking after you." This was another statement I could not argue with because I very rarely cooked. James was perfectly happy toiling away in the kitchen, and I was perfectly happy to allow him to do it. Looking at the basement, I saw just how much work I had to look forward to. It made me realize that since I was doing most of the housework, it left Mom enormous amounts of time to think up my next punishment. My ever-present tears rolled down my cheeks as I got to work. I got home after delivering some stuff to a charity Mom works for. I don't have more than 5 minutes to myself anymore. When I went to my room, I found it empty. I stood there frightened. I was finally being thrown out of my parents' house as well. Mom's voice brought me back to the here and now. "You'll find your stuff in your room, which is now in the basement. Until you can show your father and me that you are a civilized human being and not some crazed sexual animal, then you don't deserve to live in the house proper with us." I ran through the house and down into the basement. I stood there and bawled my eyes out. This had to be the last straw. I slumped to the floor on seeing everything just dumped in the middle of the room. This was going to take hours, if not days, to sort into any sort of livable, let alone likable accommodation. Mom had let me know that my usual chores will take priority over anything that concerned my comfort. This meant I was sleeping on a bare mattress on the floor for a couple of days at least until I could organize the room properly. Months passed and I kept my head down and my nose clean. The house had never looked so sprightly. I didn't do it for my parents' approval so much, although it was in the back of my mind. Of course, I wanted to show them I could be responsible. However, it was more to keep myself occupied and stop dwelling on what I had lost. It showed in the fact that Mom started to run out of housekeeping ideas. It gave me a sort of satisfaction I may be proving myself to her in some small way, or maybe it was a bit of passive rebellion. I knew it wouldn't last. She regrouped and decided I need a little community spirit. The next project she conjured up for me was to go down to Mrs. Pascoe's place and help her out. Beverly Pascoe was a longtime friend of my mother's, although she was a good 30 or so years older. Her husband had passed away years ago, and her children were overseas. Mrs. Pascoe had just undergone a hip replacement and needed home help until she could move around without a walking frame. I have to admit I spent every spare minute down there just to get out of the house and avoid Mom's controlling influence. I was tidying up Mrs. Pascoe's dining room when she asked me to make us both a cup of tea and take a break. I did as she requested, sitting quietly not saying much. "So how are you faring these days, Kelly?" Mrs. Pascoe questioned. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't sure just how much she knew of my circumstances. I brightened, although it felt artificial and I'm sure it showed on my face. I'm good, Mrs. Pascoe. Things are going well. I was lying through my eye teeth and I couldn't go on. Mrs. Pascoe smiled knowingly. That bad, huh? I nodded with tears starting to brim in my eyes. I swiped at them and choked. I don't know how much you know of my marriage breakup. While I don't think it's entirely my fault, I really don't think I deserve everything that has happened. I do know I've been a bad person and I've hurt a lot of people. 3 people in particular: my mother, my father, and the man I was married to, James. I was crying again and I couldn't stop it. Mrs. Pascoe just sat there grim-faced, nodding. I know. Marcy has told me all about it. She's been trying to keep you busy. The old saying holds true here. Idle hands are the devil's tools. I've heard a saying something like that, but it was different. An idle mind is the devil's playground. Mrs. Pascoe smiled. There are many variations to the saying, but the one I gave you goes back to the 12th century and is credited to Geoffrey Chaucer, an English author, poet, philosopher, among other things. I suddenly realized this woman sitting here wasn't just some little old lady, but someone who had a wealth of knowledge and the insight that came with age. I somehow felt buoyed a little bit by this revelation. Was this what it is like, not to have my head shoved up my own butt? I had another thought. Mrs. Pascoe, while knowing of my infidelity, didn't throw it in my face like everyone else. While I understood why everyone was so pissed at me, the constant condemnation didn't help my mindset. Mrs. Pascoe treating me like a decent, if not entirely competent person helped me to take her criticism with a large grain of salt. I was trying my best to understand. She most definitely didn't like what I had done, but she had the good grace to keep it out of her comments so as not to let emotions cloud the issue. Mrs. Pascoe continued. You know your mother has been hurting ever since she found out you cheated on James. I've been able to help her a little bit, but she really needs to work it out with you. You two need to sit down and talk it through, and I don't just mean lip service either. I mean really get into the muck and thrash it out. Find the core reason for your betrayal. Then and only then will you both be able to move on and find the love and peace you both deserve. I looked over at her sympathetic smile. Mrs. Pascoe, there's nothing I would like more than being able to talk freely with Mom again. I don't know what to do. I don't know myself why I did what I did. I know if I talked to her now, I would just hurt her more. The hurt I have already given her is unbearable. How can I talk this out with her without doing that? To start with, please lay off the Mrs. Pascoe stuff. I already know I'm old and I don't need a young whippersnapper like you reminding me every 10 minutes, call me Bev. Her face showed she wasn't offended and I had to giggle between sniffing back my melancholy. Bev patted my hand affectionately and continued. What I'm going to say next won't be pleasant, but I have to say it. You're worried about hurting your mother further. Well, let me tell you, you will hurt her, and I dare say a darn sight more before this is over. There is nothing you can do now to stop that. No matter what you do or say, not saying anything will hurt her a hell of a lot more. Therefore, it's up to you. Do nothing and destroy your relationship with your family, or risk the hurt you know will come and pray that everything works out in the end. There's no easy way out of this, is there? Bev shook her head. Nothing worth fighting for is ever easy, my dear. I nodded my understanding. I can see hard roads ahead. I just hope I can repair them enough to stop ending up in a ditch. You're on the right track to start. You've started your journey admitting you were in the wrong, and that no one else can take that blame. I smiled sadly and then looked at the clock. Oh crap, I have to get home to see to dinner, or Mum will skin me alive. Bev tittered. Relax, Kelly. She's not that bad. The reason you're down here is because she thinks it's time you had someone to help sort out your problem. Bev grinned. That and the fact she's so impressed by your housekeeping, she's run out of things for you to do. I laughed as I got up. Just the same, I don't want to go backwards here. I will ask you one favor though. I'd like to talk to you more about what went wrong, if it's okay with you. Bev got up painfully and shuffled with her walking frame to the door with me. It would give an old lady great pleasure to have you to chat with. You don't have to wait for your mom to send you down. You're welcome anytime. I smiled at the kindness Bev showed me. Thanks, Bev. You have no idea just how much I needed a receptive ear and some solid counsel. I left feeling better about my situation than I had since all my troubles started. I knew now that they started the day I met up with Pamela and let myself be dragged into their cauldron of perversion. All I needed to find out was why I was so easily led. Maybe then I would have something to talk to Mum about? Mum came home from wherever she was for the day to the smell of roast beef and baked veggies. She stood in the doorway to the kitchen for some minutes before addressing me. So, what have you been up to while I've been out? I smiled to myself. Mum was suspicious since I looked happier, and I found it funny that I didn't feel slighted by her lack of trust. Trust was something that was going to take some time to reestablish. Nothing. I did as you asked. I watched a couple of cooking shows on television while I was at Mrs. Pascoe's. They did a roast, and she gave me a few hints. I thought I'd have a go at it. I turned the light on in the oven to check it. I'm hoping it turns out right. I stood up and went back to the sink to finish washing some knives and forks. I then helped Mrs. Pascoe with some gardening. She's moving a little easier, but still has trouble getting around. If you don't mind, I'll go down every day to see that she's not having any trouble. I'll be sure not to let it interfere with my chores here. I was looking Mum straight in the face and I could see the surprise eat into her suspicion, but she didn't take it further. Okay, good. I'll be tied up for the next week or two. Keep this place neat and tidy, and I won't mind you spending your free time down at Beverly's, as long as you don't annoy her. You got that? I nodded my understanding and repeated, "Yes, Mum," but in a more lighthearted tone of voice, and Mum frowned, but didn't pick me on it. Dinner was as normal as it had been since I moved back in, but for some reason, I didn't feel as much of an outsider. Maybe it was my mood that made the difference? Mum even commented on my roast, although she didn't go overboard with the compliments. Dad, as usual, didn't say a word, but that didn't stop him from going back for seconds. From then on, every chance I got to head down to Beverly's, I took it. It's been over 12 months now since my marriage exploded in my face, and Mum knocked on my door to my room in the basement. I was mildly surprised since she had never done this before. Instead, she just walked straight in. I suppose she thought an errant child has no right to privacy. Hell, I hadn't had a door until last month, when I came home to find that Dad had put one on. I thanked him, but he just grumbled some inaudible comment and went on about his business. I took that as acceptance of my gratitude. Well, he did actually acknowledge me, and that in itself was a step forward. Your father and I have a wedding to go to today. What are your plans? I may be mostly invisible to all and sundry, but that doesn't mean I'm totally in the dark. I knew whose wedding my parents were invited to, and it made my stomach tie itself in knots. I think I'll spend the day with Mrs. Pascoe, if it's all right with you? Mum nodded and turned to go. I could see she wanted to say something more, but didn't know how to bring it up, so I took the initiative. Will you give James my best wishes? Tell him I really am sorry for what I did to him and our marriage. Tell him I'm glad to see his life is getting back on track. What I said was a half-truth. I didn't want James to marry someone else, but I knew that he deserved to be happy. Moreover, I knew by now that I wasn't going to be the one to make that happen. Mum stopped at what I had said, but didn't turn around. She had her head down as though in thought. I'm pleased you said that, Kelly. I don't know if it will make James any happier, but I will tell him for you. I'll promise you that. You know I've been helping Michelle with their wedding plans? She doesn't have any parents to help her. Your father is walking her down the aisle, and we're both on the wedding table. I felt I had to do something too. Although this was news to me, I wasn't surprised. I knew my parents well enough to know Mom and Dad would do this for James. It did make me slightly jealous, but I understood. I know, Mom. I cut in. Although this bit of information really did make my stomach cramp, I managed to console her. Don't worry about it. You're doing the right thing. I know how much James means to you. I know how much you mean to James. I know he'll be feeling anxious about what you think of his marrying someone else. You doing this will help him not feel so bad about it. Mum went to go again. Mum. She stopped again but still didn't turn to face me. I am truly sorry for everything I did. I don't know how to make it right. I doubt it can ever be put right. I do love you, and it kills me to see you so sad over something I did. I've been talking with Mrs. Pascoe, and she has given me a totally different perspective. When the time is right, maybe you and I can sit down and I'll try to answer all your questions. Mum turned to look at me with tears streaming down her face. Then she came back and hugged me. When the time is right, we'll know, Kelly. Until then, you keep working on improving yourself, and I'll be only too happy to give you the support you need. Mum let go of me and sniffed. Damn, now I have to go repair my face before your father sees the mess I'm in. She patted my arm and left me feeling mixed emotions. I sat there for ages thinking. My whole life had been made up of everything to do with me. Until now, no one had been more important than me. I see that kind of thinking only leaves you on your own with no one to turn to for help when times are bad. Why should anyone help someone as conceited and self-centered as that? I overheard Mum telling Dad that James had thanked all his friends for helping him though his marriage break up. I had to laugh at myself. What of my so-called friends? Where were they when I needed them most? I'll tell you where they were. They were nowhere to be found. I had no friends. What I had were leeches that sucked the life out of me. I had effectively alienated anyone who would have possibly come to my aid. I got the life I worked so damn hard for only to find it wasn't what I wanted. When I accused him of hurting our friends, James snapped me at the courthouse and said, "They weren't our friends, they were your friends." I now realize they weren't even my friends. To them, I was some stupid donkey being led around by a carrot on a stick that was firmly jammed up my butt. Beverly was sitting on the back veranda, knitting in the mid-morning warmth of a winter's sunshine. "Morning, Bev. Winter will be over by the time you finish that jumper. That'll be enough out of you, young lady." "I'm almost finished." "What brings you down to annoy an old lady while she's having fun?" I stood for a minute before answering, and Beverly picked up on my hesitation. "Oh, that's right. Your mom and dad are off to a wedding today." I nodded dejectedly. "I know I deserve it, but it hurts just the same." Bev shook her head. "That's just your perception, Kelly. James finished punishing you a long time ago. What James is doing now has nothing to do with you. He is just getting on with his life. The same as we're trying to do for you. Michelle and Sarah are good people. I like them both." My head snapped up and the question was plastered all over my face, but I said it anyway. "When did you meet them?" Beverly just grinned. "When I was in hospital having my hip replaced. James came to see me and brought Michelle and Sarah with him. He's a lucky man to have the friendship of two beautiful women, although I don't cotton to what I hear about what goes on at their place. I don't think it's right, but it isn't my place to judge." Bev was frowning as she finished. "For once I agree with you, Bev, but, well, I suppose it's for a different reason. I shouldn't have been surprised James would go and see Bev in hospital. It was something in his nature to be concerned for others' welfare. Another of his qualities I had effectively sidestepped and taken for granted. To get off the subject of James and his marriage, I commented on Bev's knitting again. "So you're almost finished knitting? I can't see how since you've been knitting for the last 2 weeks solid. And what is it you're knitting?" Bev looked up over her glasses. "Bed socks. Have a look in that box right near your feet." I opened the box and found almost dozens of pairs of bed socks in all colors and patterns. "Wow, who are these for?" Bev chortled. "They're for the church fete next Sunday. I knit for the church winter fete every year. It's my little bit to give back to the community who have been so kind to me after my Walter passed on." "After all these years, you still miss him, don't you?" Beverly let out a wistful sigh. "Yeah, I miss the old scumsucker." My eyebrows rose at Bev's comment and she smiled. "I love the prick and I still do, but you and I know that husbands can be a pain in the neck sometimes, no different than wives." He called me some names that hurt, and I called him some that he wrote down for later. We had some really good times, some not so good, to some that really were the pits, but all in all we were good together. Bev finished one sock and started on another, looking up every now and then to look at me. I've cried on his shoulder, and he took comfort in my arms. We were a team as solid as granite and as fluid as water. The most important thing was we both knew that no matter what, we had each other's back in a crisis. No matter what he called me in frustration, I knew that if anyone else had said the same, he would have taken their heads off at the shoulders. I tried to relate this to my marriage to James, and although I could see James doing something similar, I couldn't say for sure that I would have done the same. That revelation made me cringe with self-loathing. I'm embarrassed to say that I can't say the same for me. I know, Kelly, and you want to know why? I scanned her face and shivered, anticipating the answer I might get, but bit the bullet and nodded. Beverly smiled as she probably knew I wasn't going to like her answer. "Because you loved you more than you loved James." I knew it and felt a stabbing pain in my chest. It was no surprise, but it hurt just the same. But I did and still do love him. Bev looked me straight in the eye but never stopped her knitting. Her fingers seemed to know what to do without her thinking about it. "Oh, I have no doubt that you loved him in your own way, my dear. The problem was how that love manifested itself. You loved what James could do for you, what he could give you, and how he treated you." She looked down at what she was doing. "That's not true love, Kelly. To love someone, you have to forgive their faults as you admire strengths. I'll ask you this. Was there anything you tried to change about James?" I felt a cold chill go through me. Yeah, there were things about James the first wanted to change, how'd you know? Bev cackled. "Simple, my dear. Stupid women do it all the time. I don't mean all women are stupid, just ones who try to do it are stupid. What was it that attracted you to James in the first place?" I didn't have to think about that one. He is almost the perfect husband, funny, considerate, helpful, a good provider, protective and loving. That and I'd have liked a more exciting sex life. I saw the look on Bev's face when I said it, and I thought I'd made a mistake. "So you decided without any discussion between you to change him into the perfect husband?" I cringed at how it sounded and didn't know what to say. "Oh my dear, you have fallen into the classic trap a lot of people fall into. To change one thing in a person, you change the whole person. Change enough, and you end up with nothing of what you were originally attracted by. My frown made Bev sit and think. Take my knitting, for example. I changed the tension on the wool, and the sock no longer is as soft to the touch. To fix that, I have to change the wool thickness, maybe use bigger needles. The point is, if you keep going, you end up with something that is nothing like what you started with or wanted. I was slowly seeing what Bev was getting at. What you're saying is that I didn't take into account what other attributes were attached to James's zealous reaction to his name. His strict belief in what he saw as right and wrong. Bev nodded, giggling to herself. In a confused sort of nutshell, yes, my dear. You also love to show off your husband like some trophy, and then pack him away for when you needed him again. You bought yourself a husband at the husband shop, didn't you? How much did he cost you, Kelly? How much did it cost, and what did you use as payment to buy your husband? My conversation at the courthouse came to mind. James had basically said the same thing when he asked me what I thought marriage was all about. I had answered stupidly, "What do you mean by that?" I now realized that my answer and Bev's insight said it all. Bev stopped to count stitches and then continued. What you didn't do was love James, the person with all his faults, the man who loved you and all your faults with every ounce of his being. Can you say that you have no faults? This is a man who pledged his life to you on your wedding day? The same man who worked long hours just so you could flounce around being society's Florence Nightingale with all your charities you supported with his money? While impressing your so-called friends with your high fashion and trinkets, you were a child in love with an idea of being married and nothing more. I felt like throwing up. I don't know if I could go on with this, and Beverly could see the pain in my face. Not nice to confront your ID and look it squarely in the face. I know. I've had to do it at times, and I hate it every time I do. It's an ugly entity residing in all of us, Kelly. The trick is to know it's there and to harness it for good. Let it have its head, and you become the very monster that destroys your very own soul. How did I miss learning about this? Was I absent from school when they talked about our ID? Wasn't I listening to Mom or Dad when they had the birds and the bees talk with me? Beverly tittered and then scowled as she dropped a stitch. Now look what you made me do. She went back to cackling like an old witch as she counted her stitches. It annoyed me she was making light of my concerns, and she noticed. Oh, lighten up, Kelly. The damage is done, woman, and there is no going back. Look at the bright side. Your idiocy may have killed your marriage, but it didn't kill you. You're still breathing enough to learn from your mistakes. I sat and waited until Bev smiled and then looked over her glasses at me. There are no classes or lessons on learning about yourself, Kelly. That is where your parents failed you, my dear. Your mother knows this, and so does your father. They cottonballed you, sweetheart. I shook my head in confusion. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Beverly sighed dramatically. I'm too old to be giving you the facts of life. However, I feel that if you and your parents are to survive this, I'll have to try. Her hands went back to knitting as she looked me straight in the eye. Your mom and dad tried to give you a better life than they had. Not that that isn't a worthy goal, but some things need to be hard to make us appreciate them. Bev stopped knitting, rolled what she had into a ball, and laid it on the table beside her. Would you like a little insight from a stupid old lady into the follies of marriage and family life? I looked Bev directly in the face and laughed. This woman may be old but far from stupid. Well, yeah, in my opinion, a step up from my moronic to your stupid is a step forward, not back. Don't you think? So fire away. We were both laughing at that. When I was a young lassie much younger than you, the family unit was set up very different than it is today. Men were the masters of their domain. What my father said was law, and my mother, my sisters and I bowed to his authority. Now don't get me wrong here. I don't think that was any better than what we have today. Just the way it was. Beverly held her hand up to shade her face. When I got old enough to marry and have children of my own, things did change. They didn't change a great deal, mind you, but they did change. World War II helped women get out of the kitchen and into the workforce. That laid the groundwork for women of your mother's era to go for equality. I believe the advent of the pill also changed the dynamics of relationships and family life. Bev looked up at the sky. How about we go inside and make a nice cup of tea? I think I've had my fair share of sun today. As I put the kettle on, Bev settled herself onto one of her kitchen chairs. It's a human trait to try and give our children an easier life than we have had. Your parents fought tooth and nail to send you to the best schools, buy you the latest fashions, and give you the life they never had. Bev set the cups up and I poured the water into the teapot. What they failed to appreciate is people rarely heed those lessons or appreciate the things they themselves don't fight for. Briefly, give a child candy and he'll expect it, and throw a tantrum if he doesn't get it. Have him work for the treat, and he'll enjoy his candy so much more when he does eventually buy his own. I sat down and pondered my life up until now. For the life of me, I couldn't remember not getting anything I asked for. If I asked, I got. Turning to Bev, I heard my grandmother say on many an occasion, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." I thought then that she was a mean old witch that just hated children. Now I see that maybe she was right in a fashion. Bev was smiling as she rotated the teapot 6 times in one direction and 6 back the other. Precisely, my dear, not literally, but figuratively speaking, yes. You never had a chance to learn the hard lessons life is meant to teach. They wrapped you up in cotton wool and then expected you to go out there and be good and live with others. I frowned. What I did wasn't my mother's fault. I did it all by myself. Bev grinned. I'm pleased you understand, and yes, it was your fault that you allowed those hussies to brainwash you. However, your mom and dad have to take a small amount of blame for your downfall, as does James. They allowed you to get away with what you saw as rightful dues. They basically gave you a gun and no lessons on how to use it. No insight into what damage a gun can do. I was getting confused as to what Beverly was trying to say, and she saw it in my face. Think of the freedom and power you had. Have you heard the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely? I shook my head. No, I can't say I have. It was first put forward by a gentleman by the name of John Emmerich Edward Dahlberg Acton, or more simply put, Lord Acton, in a letter to Bishop Mandel Creighton in 1887. I shrugged my shoulders. So? Beverly chortled. So, my dear, the women of today are playing with firearms they know little about. The girls of today don't understand just how much power they wield. They have gained power at the expense of men while retaining all the power women have always had over men. Don't you go saying that it's not true. We both know what a bare leg or seductive smile will do to men. You commented to me a while back that your mother was trying to turn you into a 1920s housewife, making out that you should be barefoot and pregnant with apron strings tied to the sink. I remember my rant about how I felt Mom was subjugating me with all the demeaning household chores I was doing. She was punishing me. You only have to look at what I'm wearing to see that, I stated flatly. You could say that, but it was more to give you an idea of what she had to deal with in her life from her perspective. She is trying to show you how easy you had it growing up and hopefully appreciate what you have. I sighed. Oh, I appreciate what I had. The problem is I didn't appreciate it at the time. What did you mean by women playing with firearms? Are you saying today's woman doesn't have to right to social equality? If it is, I'd find it distasteful coming from a man and downright incomprehensible coming from a woman. Bev sighed at my comment. No, Kelly, I know what it sounds like, but that's not what I'm saying at all. How about I give you a history lesson into the dynamics of relationships between the sexes down through the ages? I shrugged. This conversation was starting to get aggravating and my hackles were bristling as Bev droned on. Okay, how about for simplification we group the time frame into age groups? My grandmother, my mother, me, your mother, and finally you. That way we can see the changes that have occurred though the relationship between men and women. 5 generations of women, although from different families, down through the ages. Sounds simple enough even for me. I was fast becoming irascible, and I had to check my temper. Beverly was sharp as ever and scowled. Don't you be getting testy with me, young lady. I'm just trying to help you see why you were thinking like you were. I suddenly felt sheepish and apologized, then sat meekly ready for my history lesson. Bev continued, okay, as I have already said, before my mother was born, in my grandmother's day, the head of the household was the man. There was no refuting that, and even the law was on the man's side. As bad as it may seem, there were rules in place to see that most of the time the wife was looked after. As in every generation, there were those that skirt society's convention, but mostly it worked. Gentlemen held doors for women, and laws either legal or moral were in place to ensure the husband didn't abuse his authority. Again, there were the few that flouted the system. Boys and young men were taught at a very young age to be respectful of females. The saying, "You don't hit girls," given to boys comes from this age. Young men were made to understand that their power was a privilege, not to be abused, but to be seen as a duty. Children were taught to mind their P's and Q's, although it was more for teaching which way the tail went on the letter. However, it gained acceptance to mean be mindful of your action with others. But in all, men had the power and years of practice to wield that power for the good of the community in general. Before you go off and say it was also stacked in the husband's favor, yes it was, but he also had responsibilities to both his wife and daughters. You've heard how men complain about how unfair the legal system is for the father and husband these days. Well, that comes from that time when the wife had no way of supporting herself if there was a divorce. In the same vein, a daughter had no way of making an acceptable living until she married. She had no assets to speak of except for her dowry, again something set up to ensure the woman had support. Since then, women have jobs of their own and money to look after themselves. The courts no longer lay blame for adultery, and the guilty party isn't punished unless it's the husband. Moreover, he's punished no matter if he's in the wrong or not. Take your divorce. Without that prenuptial, James would have been punished for your adultery, not you. You would have walked away from your marriage with half of what James had worked for all your marriage, and yet he had done nothing wrong. Back 100 years ago, James wouldn't have needed that prenuptial. You would have been guilty of adultery and sent packing by the courts. If there were children involved, then you wouldn't have been allowed to have custody because of your immoral behavior. Women have gained an advantage without paying a price for it. I felt frustrated that I couldn't deny any of what Bev was saying. My mother was born in 1895, and she saw the start of the women's movement. In challenging the male's kingdom, women were given the vote and things started to change. Although not so fast, society could cope with it. I was born in 1925, and I saw the outbreak of World War II. Again, things changed a little faster. Women were forced into the workforce to supply arms and infrastructure for the war effort. When the war ended, they stayed because there was a shortage of healthy men to take over. I was suddenly enwrapped with Bev's history lesson and sipped my tea in stern concentration of what Bev was saying. Up until my era, women were still treated with respect. There were society morals to uphold. For instance, men didn't swear in front of women. They held doors open and were courteous. Yes, it does seem a little demeaning for women to be treated like a child who needs to be guided through her entire life, especially when you look back on it from our perspective today. The point I'm trying to make is that there were rules of conduct in place for both genders. Now we're coming up to the present day with your mother being a baby boomer. Baby boomer? Was my questioning reply. Beverly chortled with shoulder shaking with laughter. Yes, my dear. She's the product of post-World War II, 1950s economic and population boom. Before then, there were 2 decades of hard times. Your mother grew up knowing how hard her parents worked for what meager possessions they had. By the time she was old enough to marry and have children, people were living on the fat of the land. That is when true feminism first took hold. With the advent of the pill and women working for themselves, men's roles were savagely rewritten. With the pill on hand, women didn't need to be the conscience of morality. Back before your mother's time, it was we women who were taught they had to stay chaste in order to control the male's sex drive. Very little contraception in those days, and abortion was not a hospital procedure. It was something resorted to by desperate women and generally with disastrous consequences. Any woman turning up pregnant out of wedlock was ostracized for being loose with her moral duty. Beverly took a sip of her tea and waited for me to digest all this. I queried, so what you're saying, irrespective of how one feels about the treatment of men and women back 100 years or so, they had rules to keep society from falling apart into general chaos. Bev put her cup down, nodding. Every generation has its checks and balances to ensure harmony. However, they are written up by society and they take time to prove themselves. Now we come to your generation. Social change, as far as it pertains to women, has risen at an exponential rate and far outstripped society's ability to keep up with it. Effectively, what you have is selling the gun before the manual has been written on proper handling. Back in my day, if a man rubbed himself up against a woman, he was labeled a cad, a lech, or a dirty old man and shunned. Women were despised as harlots and hussies. There were social attitudes that kept morality from crumbling. Today we have sexual harassment laws that take their place, but the government moves slower than a snail when it comes to change. I see women these days blatantly harassing men sexually. If a man did half of what I see young women do today, they'd be brought up on sexual harassment charges. In my day, the women of today would be social outcasts, condemned by their peers as nothing but 304s and common hookers. Men in general don't know where they stand when it comes to what is right and wrong anymore. Political correctness has gone mad trying to balance the scales. They have lost their superiority to women, who haven't yet worked out how to use the gain for the good of society. Women have always had the power to lure men to do their bidding. Now they have more power because they really don't need males to survive. The rules men played by don't translate to women because of the differences in the way both genders think. Women today are like a child in a candy shop and no one to keep them in check. You, my dear, are a prime example of that child. You were queen of all you surveyed and took what you wanted, irrespective of the consequences. You thought of no one but yourself. I was frozen to my seat with this revelation, and Bev saw the stunned look on my face. Let me clarify my thinking here. Not all women these days do it. Most are very responsible human beings. The few women who do have dropped through the cracks in today's outdated moral regulations and newfound bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo. You, Kelly, were one. Society only works if you give as much, if not more, than you take. Beverly patted the box I had brought in with her knitting. People have helped me, and I give back to the public in the only way I can. You took and never gave. Why is that, Kelly? I had tears in my eyes and a lump in my throat. Because I'm selfish and stupid? Beverly smiled sympathetically. A little bit, Kelly, but more so, you hadn't been taught to use the power you inherited from previous generations for the good of everyone. Humanity is basically selfish. It comes with the individuality of its constituents. To live with others, man has to compromise for what he wants and what's good for those around him. Most times helping others gains you 10 times the help back. Bev sat there looking the kindly old woman she was. To bring it all down to 2 simple statements: look after those who look after you, or don't bite the hand that feeds you. It's that simple, Kelly. I left Beverly that afternoon with a lot to think about. I needed time to digest everything I'd heard and how it pertained to my situation. My thoughts were dark as I lay on my bed. Tears came and went, remembering just how I'd acted, and I felt revulsion. I was starting to really understand what I had done to James, and it made me both angry with myself and sad that I'd let this happen. Bev had said it was partly my parents' fault, and maybe I should be annoyed. Not so much for what they did, moreover, what they failed to do. However, could it not be said they acted in good faith, not understanding what they themselves were doing? I saw the bottom line here. No matter at whose feet I wished to lay the blame, I still had to accept the fact that other women were brought up not very differently than me and haven't done what I had done. They had worked it out, so why hadn't I? The answer stuck in my gut like a lump of rancid meat, making me nauseous. I was a stupid, selfish, self-centered woman who thought of no one but her own interests. The responsibility was ultimately mine, and it made me realize there was only one person who can turn this around. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I heard was footsteps, and there was no daylight coming in through the one small window in the basement. I heard Mom and Dad chatting amicably about how nice the wedding was and how good James and Michelle looked together. I wondered why I didn't feel angry, or even sad they were talking this way. I stepped out from the basement door. Was it a nice wedding? I questioned without malice. Mom and Dad looked at each other for a minute or two before Mom replied, "Yes, Kelly, it was." James looked dapper in his tuxedo, and Michelle, well, she looked absolutely stunning in her bridal gown. I know you don't like your father and me staying friends with him. I held my hand up to stop her. No, Mom. No. I think that you have every right to stay friends with James. He's a good man, too good for the person I was. I hope he finds happiness with his new bride. I mean it, I really do. I know I was sad at this thought, but in a way I did feel better. I could congratulate James and Michelle without feeling bitter. There was a pregnant pause before Dad said his first intelligible words to me since I had come back home. "How was your day?" I had tears welling in my eyes and a lump in my throat, and I didn't care. "I had a good day, Daddy, very informative, and it's getting better all the time." I choked as I wiped at my face. "I'm sorry I haven't got dinner ready, but I wasn't sure when you two would be home." Dad looked over to Mom and scratched the back of his neck, something he always did when embarrassed. "Not to worry, I'll call for takeaway," he mumbled as he turned to go into the kitchen. "Chinese all right with everyone?" Mom smiled as she winked at me. "Yes, sweetheart, Chinese will do just nicely." To me, she said, "Your father and I didn't eat all that much." I know I was too nervous, worrying if everything was going to come together. In the end, it was perfect. The meal that evening was better than any I had ever encountered. I was included in the conversation. A lot of it was in relation to James and Michelle's wedding. Although still feeling a little uncomfortable, I was able to keep a smile on my face. Just before dropping off to sleep, I had a sudden idea, which cemented itself in my head the more I thought about it. As usual, I was down at Beverly's next afternoon. "Bev, can I ask you for a favor?" "Sure, sweetheart, as long as I don't have to move fast." "I'd be delighted to help out." I smiled and asked, "Do you know anyone else in the neighborhood who needs a helping hand?" "I need some money, and I thought I could do some housekeeping or laundry for a small sum of money." Bev thought for a minute and pointed to a little address book sitting beside her phone. "I was wondering when your impecuniosity would start to annoy you. Hand me that book if you will, Kelly. I think I know just the person to ask." "My what?" Bev laughed. "Your lack of finances, my dear. You have been penniless since your divorce. I was wondering when you'd be looking to improve that position." I just shook my head and commented, "Why don't you speak English next time? Did you swallow a dictionary when you were a child?" I got another round of cackling from that statement. "No, but think about it for a minute. What else does an old woman have to do apart from knitting? I do crosswords to fill my spare time and keep my mind active. It's an old adage, use it or lose it." An hour later, Bev had set me up with interviews with 6 working housewives in the neighborhood. I started out with 2 or 3 hours a day. With the practice I had at home, I was able to set a routine that enabled me to take on 2 houses a day and still stay up with my chores at home. The $10 an hour made all the difference. The heartfelt thank you and compliments I received from work-harried wives was enough to make it satisfying as well. I asked Bev not to say anything to my parents, and she reproved, "You better be doing this for good and not bad, child." I smiled right back at her. "Oh, you have no worries about that. It's something I have to do, sort of atonement for my sins if you like. I realize, like you're knitting, there is only one thing I can do that is all mine, and I want to do something for some people that deserve it." Bev frowned but said nothing. I know I was keeping this project close to my chest. I didn't know if I could do it at first, and I didn't want to have the pressure of others knowing and waiting for the result. It took 3 weeks of solid backbreaking work before I had enough money, just over $700. I bought the raw materials and took them to the basement. I read on the net about the technique and process involved with my idea. Even after all my research into the process, I still wasn't sure if I could do it. It all depended on the final step, and that was the most expensive part and could make or break the whole package. I worked diligently for hours, many times into the wee hours of the morning. Mom asked me on numerous occasions what I was up to. I just smiled and said if it works the way I want, then she'll never know. I laughed at the confused look on her face and tried to assure her it wasn't anything bad. I found a place that could do the finishing touch, but they asked for more money than I had. They said they would start and I could pay it off. This meant I had to work for another 2 weeks before I had the full price. I completed the project and delivered the items for the final step. When I got them back, I couldn't believe how nice they looked. I was actually excited as I carefully packed them up and wrapped the package in floral white wrapping paper I knew Mom had. I added some flourish with a nice white bow on top. Tonight will be the night I delivered my present. I walked into the house a week later after another afternoon of home care. I decided I had to pay my parents back for the bill I incurred with the detective agency. Also, having my own money felt good, and I wasn't sponging off my parents. Mom was sitting in the living room. "Can I talk with you a minute, Kelly?" I moved to a chair opposite her, sat down and handed her $250. She looked at the money and asked where I had got it and what it was for. "It's to repay the loan you and Dad gave me to pay the detective agency. I've been doing housework for some working mothers in the neighbor. I thought it time to pay my way." My mother watched me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "I'm impressed, Kelly. Doing this off your own bat is another good step forward, and while I'm pleased you've taken this step, there's still something you're keeping secret. You want to tell me about it, or is it still a big secret?" I shrugged my shoulder. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. What's wrong? Have I done something to make you mad at me again?" "Not that I know of, but you have been awfully secretive lately. You have to understand, it does worry me a little bit. I need to know what it is you've done. What makes you think I have done anything?" I know I was skirting the subject. I knew I had been caught out and I wasn't all that worried. I just didn't want any fuss. "Kelly, listen to me, girl. I'm not angry with you. I just want to know if you did it. If you did, then why?" I sat with my head down, wondering how she found out. "What is it you think you know, and I may be able to fill in the gaps?" Mom sighed in exasperation. "Kelly, you have a way of frustrating an angel. I was over at James's place today, and they showed me a wedding present that mysteriously just showed up on their doorstep last week. They've been ringing around trying to find out who sent it and to thank them for it. Being the sort of present it is, it's certainly an original. They want to thank the person responsible. So why ask me? I didn't even go to the wedding, and they wouldn't have wanted me there even if I had. So to think I would give them a wedding present is unrealistic to say the least." "Jesus Christ, Kelly, okay. I know it was you. I was hoping you'd come out with it by yourself. I haven't said anything to James. I wanted to talk to you first. The wedding paper was a one-off print that I got in a special consignment. I know because James saved the wrapping paper. There is no way anyone else had access to it. It had to be you, Kelly, and you've been working your butt off for the last month and a half. Now I know why. What I don't know is why you did it." I sat there for a minute and thought, and then decided to come clean. "Yes, Mom, it was me. Mrs. Pascoe and I have been talking, and I don't know, I just had to do it. I could have bought something traditional, something cheesy and a whole lot less expensive. However, that would have just been some slap in the face to them, and that's not the reason I did it." Mrs. P. was knitting for the church fete and said she does it to show her appreciation for everything the community has done for her. I was fidgeting with my purse. She said it was the giving of oneself that made it important and worthwhile. I've never given anything to anyone in my entire life. I have always taken. I have now found out how good it feels to do something for someone without being pushed into doing it. I was always good at art. I managed to get hold of the photos you had of James, Michelle, and the entire wedding party. Hand-painting the plates was a challenge. Having the design fired was the most expensive part, but I got an amazing amount of enjoyment and satisfaction in doing it. Mom just sat there and looked at me. Still fidgeting with my purse, I asked, "You mad at me for doing this?" Mom came around the table with tears in her eyes and wrapped me up in her arms. "No, sweetheart, not in the least." However, she held me at arm's length to look me in the face. "I think we need to let James and Michelle know who sent the special gift. They both think it's one of the best wedding presents they have received." I looked up to Mom. "They said that?" "They liked their quintessence imagery on the plates. I really tried hard to get their likenesses just right. James was easy as I could paint him in my sleep. Michelle's, on the other hand, was harder, especially when I tried to get her veil just right. I have a dozen disasters in my room if you're looking for china to throw at the next Greek wedding you're invited to." Mom burst out laughing. "I'll keep that in mind, sweetheart. Now, what are we going to do about this little secret of yours?" I shrugged sadly. I hadn't done enough in keeping my present a mystery. Do we have to say anything? It was what I had in mind when I decided to do it. I'm not looking for recognition or thanks or anything really. I suppose I'm still being selfish. I did it to make myself feel better. A little self-penance, you might say. If you think James should know, then I can't stop you. Although I'm a little worried they may throw the present back in my face once they find out who it's from. I know they probably have every right. Mom didn't say any more about the present. That is, at least not to anyone outside the house. Dad was coming around and talking to me more and more. I was happy to be back to square one. I now saw it was time to move on and fend for myself. I said as much to Mom as I handed her the money for my loan. With this last payment, all my financial debts are paid in full, Mom. I think it's time I got myself a place and paid my own way in life. I want to thank you and Dad for not giving up on me. I know there are parents who would have just sent me packing. Mom held me and wept tears of sorrow and joy. I know I wasn't clear-eyed either. I know I said some nasty things to you, Kelly. I didn't say them because I hated you. I said them because what you did hurt so many people, and I felt responsible for that hurt. I understood her grief and held her until we both stopped crying. Dad helped me into a small unit not far from a supermarket I had started working for as a checkout chick. After all, I still had no car and public transport is so unreliable. With no real job skills and the job not paying much, I kept on with my housekeeping. Between the two, it was enough to keep the wolves from the door. Money didn't matter as much. I certainly didn't have enough time to myself to socialize to any great extent, and truth be known, I wasn't in the mood either. There were times when I needed to get out of my unit. I generally went to my parents' place after doing housekeeping for the neighbors or over to Beverly's. She had recovered remarkable well from her hip replacement, and many a time, she commented that I didn't need to be doing housework for her anymore. I don't mind, Bev, really. I enjoy the time we have, and if we both get in and get it over and done with, then that's all the more time for us to chat. Beverly shook her head. You don't want to be spending your time gasbagging with an old biddy like me. You should be out there having fun and meeting people of your own age. I just smile every time and tell her to shut up and give me the gossip. I missed out on a lot of tuition while growing up, Bev. I need to do that now so I can make good, sane decisions from here on in. Beverly is a fountain of information. I found out some interesting things since I have been talking with her. Then my past came back to haunt me. I was just knocking off work and walking out the employee's door when I heard someone call out, "Well, there's stranger, haven't seen you in years." I thought it was you, Kelly. I just had to make sure it was. I looked up to see Tracy Kinmore standing not more than 5 feet away. My eyes narrowed. The last person I wanted to see was anyone from that bunch of, as James put it, reprobates. Yeah, well, hi. Now we can go another 10 or 20 before you drop right off the radar totally. Oh, that's nasty, Kelly. Especially when I wasn't involved in your marriage breakup. If you remember, I left the group when I realized Carol was just using us all. I tried to warn Sue and told her Carol had a bull ring through her nose and was leading her around. I even tried to warn you, but by then, your mother had pulled you out of school and I thought you dodged the bullet. What do you want, Tracy? I have no idea where Sue is. I haven't spoken to her in years. Tracy smiled and then giggled a little. I know where my stupid sister is. She's gone to the States, chasing the glittering lights of Las Vegas from what Mom says. She never did have a brain in her head. I'm almost certain she was only one gray cell heavier than that airhead Beth Favors. I was wondering if you'd like to have a coffee with me? I debated for a while, still suspicious of her intent. Okay, your shout. I'm on a budget. We sat and talked on nothing in particular until Tracy asked the question I was waiting for. Have you seen Carol or Pam lately? I felt a surge of anger and snapped irritably. I already told you I haven't, and I don't want anything to do with them either. I have just got back in the good books with my family. I have no wish to destroy my one last chance. Tracy held her hands up as a shield. Settle down, Kelly. I'm not the enemy here. I think what those hookers did to you was despicable. But you have to admit you did put yourself in that position for Carol and her girls to con you again. I started to tear up all over again. I thought I'd gotten over the pain. However, rehashing it all over again showed me it was still an open wound. Yeah, well, it still hurts. I lost someone important to me because of them. It still wrangles me to think I was so stupid as to believe what Carol was shoveling. Tracy sat there just looking at her cup before speaking up again. You want to know something funny? What can be so funny when it concerns those women? Tracy grinned. What if I told you that out of everyone connected with that mob, you and I are the only ones to have a life worth living? I looked up at Tracy and her eyes were gleaming with wicked spite. Really? She nodded. Really? My stupid sister Susan is most likely on her back, somewhere being used by some yank punter as chip money. Beth is living in a world of her own. I have no idea how she survives. She hangs around with bikers and has more artwork tattooed into her stupid hide than the Sistine Chapel. She's certainly not with Norm anymore. He was done for tax evasion and is serving a stretch in prison. I don't know when he'll get out. This is the biggie for you. Pam has been diagnosed with AIDS and won't last another 12 months. My eyebrow rose at that bit of gossip. Tracy continued. Chad dodged that bullet. Not because he was smart, but because after he was kneecapped, he put on so much weight and turned into such a slob. Pam stopped having sex with him not long after. He's not that much better off, though. Hangs around St. Vinny's looking for handouts most days. Carol flits between jail terms on prostitution charges and Bacalai's trying to make a few dollars to buy her next fix. Between what the inmates have done to her in prison and her drug dependency, she's nothing to look at anymore. No one has seen Mal and Ben since James brought the curtain down on the lot of them. I sat there not knowing what I felt about Tracy's revelations. I knew Carol used drugs on occasions. Maybe a little pot, but never thought she'd get hooked on the hard stuff. So there you go. You may think your life is hell, but I can say you're in a far better position than any of the others. You have a legitimate job, a place to lay your head at night, and family and friends you can turn to when you need help. You're not doing too bad, sweetie. I smiled at the thought that what Tracy had said was true. I tended to concentrate on what I lost and not on what I had managed to gain back. I suppose you're right, Trace. I'm lucky I have a family that didn't give up on me. I thought for a while I was all alone, but now I think about it, it was me pushing them away, not the other way around. Tracy and I chatted well into the afternoon on past events from our school days. I filled her in what I had been doing and how I'd started to straighten out my life. It was a rather pleasant afternoon considering. Tracy started to smile, and I inquired as to what she was thinking. You know some bloke by the name of Steve Duncan? She asked. I thought for a minute. Didn't he drive that American car? Yeah, that's him. A black Trans Am, if I'm not mistaken. He got caught by some bloke knocking off the wife and spent a couple of painful months in hospital for his trouble. From what I heard, that little a-hole wants to take it careful from now on. He only has one nut left to operate with. I think he's the one James grabbed to get into the party and then did a runner after that. I'm not surprised he's been worked over. Always thought he was a bit of an arrogant a-hole. What happened to his car? James said it was blocking his driveway and had it towed away. I think it went to the car crusher. Nah, although Steve couldn't find the money to get it out of the police impound yard. A copper by the name of R. Hin SC rescued it from being crushed. SC? I inquired. Tracy nodded. Senior Constable Ron Hin. It seems he has a soft spot to classic American sports cars. Couldn't stand the idea of it turning into a paperweight. I just nodded and thought about how some people don't ever learn from their mistakes. So what about you? What have you been up to? I'm a housewife and mother and loving every minute of it. I got away from Carol and her bunch at the right time. I met my husband Jake, and we have 2 little boys, Thomas and Steven, and a baby girl, Janelle. I love all of them to death, and they keep me pretty busy. Tracy then hit me with a dilemma. Would you be interested in coming for a barbecue and meeting them? I hesitated for a minute, and Tracy commented, I'll understand if you don't want to. I was just being fat-headed and wanted to show off my family. Sorry if it upset you. I smiled. That's not it. I'd love to meet your family, but I have a little problem. Mum sees you as part of Carol's gang, and I don't know what she'll think if I tell her that I've met up with you. The last time I met up with anyone from my past, I almost destroyed my mom and dad, not to mention James and my marriage. Tracy patted my arm. I understand, but if you really want to, you can bring your mom and dad along with you. We can have a barbecue and it'll give me a chance to apologize for some things I said to your mother while we were in school. I was surprised that Mom didn't go ballistic when I mentioned Tracy and her invitation. So what do you think? Kelly, I have no problem with Tracy, as long as she doesn't try to turn your head inside out like Carol did. The fact that you came to me straight away shows me that you're thinking along the right lines. How about we suspend judgment until after the barbecue? I sat relieved I had made the right decision. I was just getting over being touted as the moron of the century, and it does have an effect on your self-confidence. The barbecue went off well. Tracy apologized for some of the nasty things she said while a stupid teenager and tried to apologize for her sister's part in my marriage breakup. Mom wouldn't allow it. You can't go around feeling ashamed and apologizing for what your sister does. We spent the afternoon and evening playing with Thomas and Steven. Mom went gooey-eyed over Janelle. I have to admit that she did pull at my heartstrings too, and I got that clucky feeling a lot women get when in the presence of babies. I kept my head down, and in 2 years, I'd managed to find some close friends. They knew I didn't have a lot of money, and so when I begged off early from after-work drinks, they just waved and thanked me for coming. Tracy kept in touch. I think she appreciated a babysitter that was reliable. She wouldn't hear of it when I said she didn't have to pay me. I tried to tell her that I enjoyed playing with the children. It got her goat when she found out I was using the money she paid me to buy stuff for her kids, but I just giggled. I earned that money, as you so rightly put it, Trace. And since it is my money, then I think I have the right to spend it as I see fit. Tracy just shook her fist at me and smiled through her frustrations while I smirked. I worked my way up through the chain of command at work until a new manager took over. Michael Kincaid was a pleasant enough man, if a little distant at times. Most of the staff got along with him, and he would take time to have a chat with everyone most weeks. It may only be for 5 minutes, but certainly helped the rest of us feel a little easier in our workday. One thing that gave me great satisfaction was getting my very own bank account along with a credit card. When I applied for it, I was still living at home, so that's where it was sent to. Mom rang me at work to say I had mail. When I got there and opened the envelope, I just stared off into space and thought. Mom noticed. Is there something bothering you, darling? I smiled. No, Mom. I was just thinking about the last time I held a credit card. I looked over to her and sighed, then waved mine in front of me. James owned the last one. I just got to use it. I had no worries about paying it off, no hassles with the banks if I overdrew it. Mom could see the misty look on my face. This is all yours, darling. This one you'll have to be responsible for. Dad surprised me when he chopped into the discussion. I hadn't seen him standing in the kitchen sucking on a cold one. My advice, Kelly, he started as he pointed his beer at the card I was holding, is to not charge anything that you don't have the funds to pay off at the end of the month. It may be nice not having to pay it all in one go, but it will cost you dearly in interest down the track. I thought back to the denouncement I received from James about using credit cards. Beverly was right. I had bought my husband and used sex as I did the credit card. I paid the minimum monthly payment, and as Dad was saying, it cost me dearly for that error in judgment. I know, Dad, that's one lesson I will never forget. For the last 6 months, I have been doing some sign writing on chalkboards for the veggie department. The staff and customer thought doing little caricatures of vegetables with balloon text boxes was a great lark, as though the veggies were selling themselves. I got a wonderful sense of accomplishment by putting my artistic talents to work. All this was done on my lunch break, or either before or after work. The reasons for doing it was because I thought it added a little personalization to the supermarket. The fact that I got enjoyment out of it was just a side benefit. Early Monday morning, Michael called me into his office. Take a seat, Kelly. I'll be with you in a minute. I was worried about my job. Michael had cleared out some of the slackers in the shop, and I feared I was next. With little or no qualifications, the chances of getting another job were slim. I always thought I pulled my weight, but maybe Michael didn't agree. I sat nervously looking around the office. Looking over a folder on his desk, Michael nodded, then looked up at me. You have a very good attendance record. The best we have, in fact. Haven't missed a day or been late for work since you started here. Your work ethics are commendable, Mrs. Garrett. It'd be nice if all our employees were as conscientious. I smiled nervously. It's Ms. Garrett. I'm divorced. I do my best. I have little training in anything else, so I compensate by doing the very best I can at what I do. It was nice to know that my efforts were actually being noticed. Michael's eyebrow rose as he put the folder down and sat back, interlacing his fingers together in front of his stomach as he tapped his thumbs together. His facial expression was one of contemplation, but it still worried me. I felt as though the other shoe was about to drop. I'm sorry, Ms. Garrett. I haven't been right through your file as yet. I just assumed that with you being around my age that you'd be married. Michael's face seemed flush as he apologized. He quickly continued, I was talking to Ron and produced the other day and found out you're the one with the artistic flair. I nodded, not sure how to respond. I have to admit that your drawings give a certain quality to the dull produced tickets. How would you like a challenge and tackle some artwork for the entire store? I've talked it over with upper management and they agreed to a trial. We wish to see how it comes across with the customers. I sighed in relief at the news and then grinned. It'd be my pleasure. I enjoy doing it. It's therapeutic, you might say. If you let me know what you're after, I can do up some designs after work and see how you like them. Michael contemplated this for a minute. No, I don't want to wait that long. I'm keen to see how this works, and so are the guys in head office. You can have Ms. Wallace's old office to set up your own office. See Kathy for any art supplies you may need, and you can get to work straight away. We talked over possibilities for the next hour or so. Michael didn't make any promises, but if I could do this right, then I had a chance to make something of myself other than a lowly paid checkout attendant. Not saying that anyone who does that job isn't worthy of advancement, but it did tend to be a dead-end career to anyone who had little to no ambition. I was astounded. I couldn't believe my good fortune. I had originally done some simple drawings to brighten up a drab, uninteresting section of the store, and now it looks as though it has turned into a full-time job with something I love doing. On the way home, I had to tell someone, so instead I raced over to my parents' place to tell Mom. She was smiling like a Cheshire cat as I related my good news. That is wonderful news, sweetheart, but it's only what we've been telling you all along, Kelly. I sat back and sighed, still trying to get my head around my good fortune. I know, Mom. Give a little to get a little. The selfish not only hurt others, but hurt themselves as well. I brightened and continued. The best thing of all is that if this gets off the ground, then I'm looking at a promotion and salary package to go with it. Check out Chick to Art Designer. I'll finally be able to get a nicer place and maybe even a car. I shivered with excitement. Mom patted my arm to calm me down. No putting carts before horses, Kelly. One small step at a time. I am pleased to see you now have ambition, though. Anything your father and I can do to help, don't hesitate to ask. I thought about what Mom had said and then shuddered about the last time I heard that statement. I certainly put the cart before the horse with my harebrained scheme. If I had found out that James hadn't gone to bed with Michelle and come home early, then I wouldn't have been over at Pam's acting like such a stupid cum-dump. Not that it would have made a great deal of difference. James had already found out what I was up to, and that was enough to bring my actions into the open. I now realized I had doomed my marriage long before that fateful night when James burst into Pam's place and caught me red-handed. All I would have done is prolong the agony and maybe suffered just as much. I do think if I had used what little gray matter I had, I'd have saved James and my parents the initial heartache. However, looking on the bright side, I do believe that if it weren't for the trauma that episode caused, I very much doubt that I'd have learned anything from the destruction of the marriage. I vowed never to do that again. If Mom's reaction was pleasing, then my father giving me a hug is something I'll never forget if I live to 100. We've been getting along better than I'd ever hoped. Since the breakup of my marriage, he had never really touched me or held me in his arms, and I did miss that. I was wondering if your mother and I had wasted our money with all those art classes you took at school. Good to see our faith in you has been rewarded. Maybe we can get you to do a family portrait, signed of course. One never knows when you'll get famous, and we'll have the first Kelly Garrett original. I laughed and punched him on the arm. I seriously doubt that, Dad, but thanks for the encouragement. Maybe for your next wedding anniversary, I'll do a portrait of you and Mom. Bev was just as excited with the news as my parents were, although she had a little advice to add to it. It won't happen every time, Kelly. There are people out there that will take advantage of your goodwill. The main thing to remember is not to do anything for one specific reason. If that reason falls through, then all you have done is for naught. The main reason for giving is so you feel good about it within yourself. That way, if the gesture doesn't have the desired impact on those around you, you still have your self-satisfaction to fall back on. Anything you receive after that is pure gravy. My life was finally back on track. It had been a dark and dismal couple of years, interspersed with periods of clarity in the pursuit of learning to organize my priorities. I doubt it would have happened without the love and determination of family and friends. James was right again. Without them, you're alone in a hostile world. I have seen James and Michelle on a few occasions. Many a time I wanted to go up and make a formal apology, but chickened out at the last minute. I have sat outside their place on numerous occasions, willing myself to go in and apologize for my stupidity and arrogance. I drove off every time with the notion they haven't any interest in hearing anything from me. My life went on progressing in uneven leaps and bounds. Some days were good while others felt like I was going backward. Bev comforted me in those times and said it's all part of life. As long as you're taking 2 steps forward and the occasional one back, then that's all you can wish for. Where was this woman when I was growing up? Michael came into my office about 6 months after my promotion. I'd been given more responsibility with extra stores to design artwork for. Not just in-house promotions now, but I'd been given the opportunity to do actual advertising to be placed in leaflet drops, newspapers, and magazines. Some being counter and head office did his thing, and the bigwigs found out they could save a great deal if they employed their own graphics designer and cut the expense of employing someone to do it from outside. This was a completely new area for me, as it required me to brush up on my computer graphics with night classes. It was a challenge that stretched my imagination and talent, but I was determined not to let Michael down for giving me this opportunity. Nearly finished for the day? He casually inquired. I looked up from my latest project. I'm having a little trouble with this latest design. I have to admit to feeling a little frustrated. There's something missing, and for the life of me, I can't work out what it is. I went back to the design I was working on, bending down to go over every detail with a critical eye. Frustrated eye? Might be an idea to leave it alone until something pops up. How about joining me for a drink? I stood up and turned to see Michael leaning against the door jamb with his arms folded. I had the distinct impression that he was checking out my figure as his eyes rose to meet mine. His comment and the sly grin told me I wasn't wrong. Are you asking me out on a date? And what exactly is it you're expecting to pop up? I don't know what came over me. I haven't flirted with anyone in such a long time that my face felt it bloomed in a red-hot flush. Michael shrugged and chuckled. If you want to call it that, I was just thinking drinks to get you out of here and allow you to relax a little. I had the impression that he was comfortable with himself and didn't want to embarrass me any further. You spend an excessive amount of time here. Just because you're on salary now, doesn't mean you have to work 100 hours a week, Kelly. I did relax, then I put my magnifying glass down and sighed over getting past that awkward moment. I enjoy what I do, Mike. I don't have much of a social life, so I need something to occupy my time. Michael laughed aloud. Has it ever occurred to you the reason you have no social life is because you spend so much time at work? I laughed along with him on that one. Okay then, maybe you're right. Lead the way. I'm not getting much done here anyway. That was the first of many drinks. I liked his humor and style. He never openly hit on me, but I could sense his developing interest. I did have a little heart ache as I realized that Michael resembled James in so many of his attributes. It was the way he would shepherd me through a crowd, one arm out in front, with the other hand in the small of my back, guiding me. It was something James had done when we were married. It gave me a sense of protection that I loved, although not anything alike in looks. But as far as personality goes, they could have been twin brothers. I got the distinct impression Michael wanted more from our relationship, and I anguished over how far to take it. I asked Beverly for her opinion, and she just laughed. I have no idea, Kelly. This is your decision, your life, and no one can make it for you. Just ask yourself 2 questions. Have I learned anything from my past, and have I punished myself enough? That caught me. You think I'm punishing myself? Bev just smiled. Oh, you're definitely still punishing yourself. You work hard at 4 jobs and rarely go out. If you're not working, then you lock yourself away in your unit. What does that tell you? I think it's time you stopped. James isn't vindictive, Kelly. I doubt that he's petty enough to wish you a life of a shriveled-up old spinster, working her finger to the bone. I think you've proved that you can be a decent person, so go and get life. Stop this mopping around. I didn't know the answer to either of Beverly's questions with any certainty. I did understand what she was saying, but found it hard to judge my own actions, so I spoke to Mum about it. Do you have feelings for Michael? I chewed my bottom lip. Yes, I think I do. I don't know if it's because he's so much like James, or if it's something completely different. I know I'd like it to go further, but then I remember what I did to James. I get frightened that I might fail again. I don't want to put myself or anyone else through that ever again. Mum gave me a big hug. I doubt that you'll ever make that mistake again, sweetheart. You will make different mistakes as sure as the nose on your face, but I doubt they'll be anywhere near as devastating as that one. Michael and I dated for almost a year, and I was feeling more comfortable every day with him. At work, we conversed like any other boss and employee would. When we were out together, we left work behind. I'd feel great every time he rubbed my hand in public when no one was looking, or whisper salacious comments when there wasn't anyone in earshot. It wasn't anything outrageous, but it made me feel naughty in the least and libidinous at the most when in his company. Some of the other girls at work asked on many occasions when the wedding bells were set to peal. I just smiled and shrugged. I haven't even got an engagement ring yet. How would I know? It took Michael almost 6 months of very romantic courting and yes, wicked flirting before I felt sure enough this wasn't just a short-term office fling. Finally, After a particularly romantic evening, I felt secure enough to ask, "Would you like to come in for a nightcap?" Let me see. Stay and try my luck with a gorgeous woman who is worth every frustrating day I have been living these last 6 months. Or go home to an empty flat, a cold beer, and just as cold bed, then lay there wondering where my brains have disappeared to. So I take it you'll be heading off then? I quipped with a nonchalant wave of my hand. Michael grabbed me around the waist and lifted me clear off the floor. I squealed in surprise and wrapped my arms around his neck, holding on for dear life. He felt so strong. I was nothing more than a feather for him to wave around. "You are one hell of a tease, Miss Kelly Garrett. I do not intend to go anywhere. Now that you've opened the door, I intend to see to it that you never ever want me to leave either." Michael was a tender, considerate, and accomplished lover. I was certainly shame-faced once I recovered. "I'm sorry, Mike, but it's been such a long time since I felt attracted to a man with such intensity." To Michael's credit, he waves it off. And here I was thinking I was God's gift to the female gender. I dragged him to me and whispered breathlessly, "You have nothing to fear with your ability." I was blown away. "You do again even half what you did tonight, and I'll be a very happy woman." Michael and I made love. I was in heaven. This wasn't the raw sexual battering I'd experienced during my disgraceful episode of infidelity. This was tender loving, and I was impressed by his stamina and ability to recoup so quickly. When I walked into Bev's place the following day, she must have seen it in my face. Well, if it isn't the cat that has stolen the cream, what have you been up to, my dear? You're simply glowing. I felt the blood rush to my face as it reddened. Having to admit to Beverly that I'd been sexually active again was embarrassing. Mike and I, we? Bev held her hand up. "No need to explain your amorous dalliances, my dear. I'm way past caring about that kind of gossip. I'm surprised it has taken this long for your beau to persuade you. He's either a real gentleman or an incompetent man." Beverly cackled her head off at her little joke. I just stood there with a quiescent smile on my face. "You finished laughing your silly head off? Michael is far from incompetent. He's the most wonderful lover I could possibly hope for. I dare say even a little better than James, but don't quote me on that. I think a little bias might be unfair to James." Bev got herself back under control and started to make tea. "Okay, Kelly, I can see you have something you need to get off your chest." I shook my head in wonder. Beverly could read me like a book. "You do know you've finally made it, Kelly? You've beaten the odds. I know there were many people who wrote you off, said that you were damaged goods, and only fit for society's rubbish dump. I have to admit it didn't look good at the start, but my God, girl, you certainly pulled your socks up and straightened yourself out. So, what's your problem now?" "I think I'm in love." No, I know I'm in love. However, that has brought up a lot of worries I don't know how to handle. Michael has been hinting for a while. It might be a good idea to take our relationship to the next level. I don't know what I'll do or say if he pops the question." Beverly frowned. "You worried you'll fail again?" "No," I shouted in panic. Then a little more quietly, "No, that's not it. I'm worried if, or should I say when he finds out, I'll lose him. I'd be going back to being an A-class moron if I thought Michael wouldn't find out about my past. Right now, I can walk away, and although it'll be heartbreaking, I know it won't hurt as much as if I go ahead with this relationship and he leaves because of something someone has told him." Bev poured our tea and sat thinking. "Have you so little faith in Michael?" I thought about it for a minute. "No, I don't think that. What's worrying me is if he finds out from someone else, then it can be said that I deceived him and he'd be right. I know what deception does to a relationship firsthand. I don't want my next relationship, or marriage for that matter, to be under such a cloud." "Then you have only one avenue left to travel. You'll have to tell him." I sipped my tea and stared at the vase of roses on the table. No, I can't do that either. I'll be tempted to sugarcoat it. I need someone to tell him how it was, with all the gory details. Someone like you or Mum, perhaps. I didn't get much sorted out talking to Bev, except that she agreed Michael needed to know what he was getting himself into. Once I was home again, I remembered Michael was coming over for dinner. I thought of something James had said to me many years ago, and because of that, I was racing against time as I looked at the clock. Damn, I might not make it. I kept up the pace, flinging my clothes off as I checked the oven. I found out Michael loves roasts, and pork was one of his favorites with plenty of crackling and applesauce. With a quick peek out the window, I saw Michael pull into the visitor's car park. "Yes," I said to myself. One last trip to the bedroom to check myself over to see all was where it was supposed to be. I walked past the kitchen, picking up the last item I needed on the way to meet my lover at the door. The doorbell rang. "It's open." I sang out, then had an immediate frightful thought. What if he's not alone? I had no time to panic any further as the door swung open. Surprise! Michael stood there dumbfounded. Well, he would be, wouldn't he? I was kneeling at the front door waiting my lover, clothed in nothing but stockings and CMFs. Trusting the beer in hand would add weight to what I hoped was a wicked and sinful smile on my face. Oh dear. You sure can say surprise, a gorgeous surprise. My heart rate quickened and knew it was working. Michael quickly glanced over his shoulder, suddenly remembering the door was still open and anyone coming down the hall would get an eyeful of his girlfriend naked. We had a quick one right there. I grinned. You liked it, did you? Damn woman. What's not to like? What did I do to deserve that surprise? I was reliably informed it was one fantasy that most men have. I thought I'd like to try it to see if the person was right. He was, as a matter of fact, but I have concluded that he was right in so many things. Well, that's one I can cross off my list of fantasies. Not that I wouldn't mind if you do it again sometime. If you keep up what you did to me in the bedroom, then I can guarantee that while it won't be every time, I'll certainly make sure you don't forget what it's like. I then had a small concern. Will you be telling your mates down the pub what I did? Michael looked at me with a stunned look. You have got to be joking. Let me tell you a little about men and what they talk about with their mates. If you were a casual, piece of crumpet, I jokingly helped him. Michael chuckled. Yeah, a one or two nighter, then I'd be bragging like crazy and having my mates green with envy. However, I can tell you, no sane man would say anything like that about his steady girlfriend or wife. One thing is the guys would think I was trying to fool them. Even if I could convince them it was true, I'd then be worried my mates were trying to backdoor me from then on. No, better to say nothing, agree with the a-holes that we don't get enough sex and sit back grinning to myself thinking, tough luck guys, but I'm on clover here. Eat ya hearts out. I giggled and felt good that I had made Michael's day and thought to myself, thanks James, you were right again. I don't know if it was my stunt a couple of days ago, or if he was planning it for a while. Either way, Michael caught me totally unprepared. I should have guessed something was going to happen, but I was over the moon when he informed me that it was his turn to surprise me and invited me to dinner. On the day of our date, he wasn't in the office as normal. I didn't think anything of it when he rang and told me he had last-minute things to take care of, and was it all right if I came past his place before we ate? I knocked on his door about 7. When the door opened, he was dressed immaculately. His aftershave made its presence subtly noticed and made my head swim with pleasant sensations. Offering me his hand, he drew me in. Step this way, my lady. Dinner will be a little while longer. I could hear soft romantic music in the background, and most of the lighting was subdued with candles spread around the room. Guiding me through to the dining room, Michael picked up a glass of wine and handed it to me. The table was set with 2 lit candles, making it obvious that we weren't going out for dinner as I had first thought. The single long-stemmed rose lying across my placemat was corny and charming nonetheless, certainly a thoughtful touch. This is amazing, Mike. You did all this for me? Michael looked around the room as though he was looking at all the preparations. Yeah, sure. I can't see any other woman in here, so it must be for the one I love. All I could do was slap his arm. You know what I mean? This is so lovely. I don't know what to say. How about you dance with me until you find the right words? Michael led me into the lounge room where he'd shifted some furniture to give us room. It was like a fairy tale dream come true. I melded into my lover, and he held me close. I felt so at peace. I didn't want this to end. We danced for a while until Michael indicated that it might be an idea to eat. I think we both might be needing the strength to finish the night. I marveled at the fettuccine carbonara Michael had prepared. You like? I certainly hope so. It's about the only thing I can cook to any degree that's edible. There's wine trifle for dessert. You don't need to cook anything to whip one of those up, he stated with a silly grin on his face. I just shook my head. We finished eating, had a couple more dances, and sat on the couch playing tongue tack. The whole evening was so wonderfully romantic. I couldn't help feel mellow and very amorous. I just couldn't have asked for more. This was the full court press, right down to the intimate, sweet little nothings he whispered to me while dancing. I could see something was on his mind as we sat there looking into each other's eyes, and I started to get anxious myself. Then he did what I was afraid of from about halfway through this wonderful evening. He dropped to his knee and asked the very question I was dreading. Miss Kelly Garrett, will you marry me? The look on his face and the way he nervously fumbled with the engagement ring broke my heart, and the tears fell like a waterfall. The confused, almost sad look I got made it worse, and all I could do was sit and weep. Michael wrapped his strong arms around me, not saying anything. then soothing and reassuring me that everything was all right. I understand if you don't want to get married right now, but I thought we were getting to that stage that. He trailed off, not knowing what to say next. Once I got myself under control, I suddenly realized through the sadness and confusion who could help me try to help Michael understand my reluctance to accept his wonderful offer. I got up, took out a pen and paper from my purse, and wrote down an address. Handing it to Michael, I sniffed. "There's something about me that you need to know." Michael put his finger to my lips to silence me. "The only thing I need to know is if you love me as much as I love you." I shook my head, removing his finger from my quivering lips. "Tonight has been so wonderful. I do love you more than you could possibly know. In a perfect world, that is all we need, however. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I have done some terrible and evil things in my past, Michael. Things that I'm ashamed of, things that should never have been done." I took a tissue from a box on a side table and dabbed at my eyes. "The nightmares will haunt me for a long time to come. Before you make your offer again, and I sincerely hope you do. If you do, you need to talk to this person. I could tell you, but I have to admit I'd be guilty of watering down the severity of my actions. I believe this person will give it to you straight. Talk to them, and then come to me if you still want to pursue this." Michael looked at the address on the paper for a long time, and then put it in his pocket. "I can't see how anything can change my mind, but if it's what you want, Kelly, then I'll do as you ask." I smiled sadly. "It's not what I want, but it's what has to be. I couldn't live with anything else." I got a text message the next day. "Carrie's Cafe in the mall. Tomorrow at noon. We need to talk." I shivered at seeing that message. It didn't look to be abusive, but it made me uneasy just the same. I was sitting there drinking my coffee as a familiar voice broke my thoughts. "Why did you send him to me, Kelly? Why not to someone else, someone who might give you a better hearing?" I stiffened at his voice, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Without turning around, I spoke. "Because you are the only one who could possibly get through to Michael just how bad I was, James. Anyone else would pull his or her punches. You're not a vindictive man, James. I know that. I knew you would tell it like it was, and be truthful till it hurt. I'm praying that you did just that." James sat opposite me, saying nothing until a waitress came to take his order. I told him everything like it was. I told him what you were like and how you manipulated our marriage. I told him every single detail. I left nothing out, not even what transpired at Pamela and Chadwick's place. James's eyes bore into me to emphasis what he had just said. Every little detail, Kelly. I felt no malice as I related it. There was no emotion, Kelly, just facts. I'm not sure he believed me, but he certainly listened. I shuddered at the possible ramifications of what I'd done. I could feel the tears of loss as James sat there gazing off down the mall. "Thank you, James. I appreciate your truthfulness. I don't know where this will go from here, but at least it's out in the open now, and I'll deal with it from here." We sat there not talking for quite some time. It was a strained silence that neither of us could seem to break. Before James got up to leave, there was something I needed to say. "I'm sorry for what I did to us, James." James looked me straight in the eye but said nothing, just waiting. I know I've said it a million times, but I know now exactly what I'm apologizing for. James scratched his ear as though he was debating with himself what to say. Finally, he came out with, "That man is probably as big a moron as you. So you two should fit together well?" James quipped nonchalantly with the flick of his hand, and then smiled, and it raised my spirits. "I forgive you, Kelly." My eyes misted as he went to get up. Then he stopped with a sly grin on his face. "Mickey says thank you for the wedding present. Most unique wedding present we received. Got double and triple of everything else, but yours was certainly a one-off." I smiled as I dabbed at the tears tracing their way down my cheeks. "No problem. I enjoyed making the plates. Did Mum tell you?" James' smile broadened and shook his head. "No, you idiot. You just did. Someday you'll learn to keep your damn mouth shut. We asked everyone who went to our wedding, and no one knew anything about it. While discussing it with Mickey, I remembered you took art classes in school and excelled at it, then put two and two together. It wasn't too hard to work out." I grinned as I shook my head. "I never could pull the wool over your eyes, could I, James? Did Michelle really like them?" James winked. "You bet she did. Your mom has been keeping us abreast of your recovery. Mickey's been after me to thank you for some times now, but I didn't know if you wanted the exposure. In addition, for what it's worth, I also told Buggerlugs that I really think you have changed for the better. I told him you spent a lot of time and effort scrubbing at those leopard spots of yours. Took yourself back to bare metal from what I can understand. I told him, as far as I'm concerned, you're as clean as a whistle. Buggerlugs? Mickey? What's got into you, James? Hypochondrisms aren't your thing." James shrugged. I still rather be called James, but I don't get antsy about it anymore. You're not the only one who needed to get their head out of there, but I figured if you can do it, so can I. I giggled as James finally got up to leave. Don't be a stranger. Drop over sometime. There's a china cabinet Mickey wants to show you. He started to walk off, throwing over his shoulder in a louder voice. You owe me, Kelly. You have a habit of running up my credit cards. Which reminds me, Mickey and Sarah think you have a wicked taste in clothes. Apart from that, pay your bloody debt. Don't let the $5,000 I paid for that damn china cabinet go to waste. He slid his hands into his pocket as he casually disappeared into the crowd. I pay all my debts, and you've just stuck me with the damn bill for coffee. A coffee you invited me to. You a hole. I shouted after him. Those close to me frowned at the giant grin on my face. I was giggling. I could see his head throw back and his shoulders jiggling up and down as though he was laughing heartily, still with his hands in his pockets. I just shook my head. At least Michelle and Sarah had got the use of all those clothes I bought on James's credit card, just before he threw my butt out with the trash. That's when Beverly's little saying came back to me. Never do anything for one reason only. I took a chance to make myself feel better, hoping that it would be well received, but not expecting anything to come of it. Now I know my present had a twofold benefit. Beverly? She's a damn smart woman, that woman. My coffee with James was Saturday. I was nervous all weekend waiting for either the phone or my doorbell to ring. I somehow managed to get through to Monday morning. I was sitting at my work table, trying to finish my latest design. I had my elbows on the table and my head in my hands. I just couldn't concentrate. Do you have a gambling problem as well, Kelly? I looked up to see Michael again, leaning against the doorjamb of my office with his arms folded. My brain took a few seconds to register what Michael had just said. Do you always lean against doors when you ask stupid questions? I took a breath and let it out slowly. As far as the gambling goes, for what it's worth, no, not that I know of. My face was neutral and belied the emotions running rife through me. My heart felt like it was beating itself to death. I could feel the pressure of my pulse in my temples. I was worried ever since my meeting with James about Michael's reaction, and now he was here. You took an awful chance. I nodded. I know, but it was that, or pray you'd never find out. I couldn't take the chance. While there is a chance I'll lose you now, there would be no chance of keeping you if I hadn't arranged for you to talk to James. I figured that if anyone was going to lay down the facts straight, then it was him. Everyone else would have sugar-coated what I had done. I was dying inside, wanting to know what Michael had decided. If there's one thing I learned out of my marriage to James, was that my deceit and disrespect were what ultimately brought our marriage down. Everything else was just a byproduct of those two failings on my part. I sat there like my seat was on fire. I wanted to get up, run to him, and then on bended knees plead with him not to leave me. At the same time, I wanted to turn away so I didn't have to look at the disgust that might, at any moment, erupt onto the features of his gorgeous face. So, where does this leave us? I'm done with lying, done with manipulating for my benefit. Michael frowned at the statement, so I clarified it for him. Everyone manipulates someone or thing at some time in their life, Mike. It's not bad until you do it for selfish reasons. You manipulated me the other night when you popped the question. You led me to believe that it was just another dinner out. It wasn't a selfish reason, so it was more than acceptable. Michael nodded his understanding without saying anything. I have learned a painful lesson at the expense of one marriage to a wonderful man. Fate has chosen to give me a second bite at the cherry. I thought I knew what love was. It turns out I didn't. I was just in love with the idea of being in love. I had to make sure that the man I now truly love knows the unadulterated truth. I'm sure my heart had stopped as I waited for him to reply. James is a little on the stupid side, you know. I nodded, wanting to scream, wishing he would just come out with it. Yeah, you might say that. He said the same about you, although if you saw his wife, you might have a different opinion. I saw a blonde there, and a redhead. Which one's he planting? I smiled with a sly grin. Both, from what I hear. The blonde's name is Michelle and his wife. The redhead is Sarah, their good friend and play partner. I leant back in my chair. Doesn't look so stupid, now does he? Michael just laughed and I pressed him again. I need to know where this leaves us, Michael. You haven't answered my question. Yes, I did. I told you why I sent you to James. No, I don't mean that question. I want to know if you'll marry me. I wouldn't have slammed my hip into the corner of the desk if I hadn't got up so fast while crying so hard. I threw myself into Michael's arms. I want nothing more than to marry you, Mike. I promise I will love you with all my heart. I'll never lie to you. And I won't disrespect you ever. I will worship the ground you walk on. Michael held me off him and looked into my tear-stained face. That last bit isn't necessary, as long as you love me. I hugged him again and wept tears of joy. I had finally dragged me out of purgatory. I had paid for my sins and felt good for doing it. Michael and I stood waiting for the door to open. Michael had told me little of today. Just that James had rung him to make sure to have me over to see the cabinet and then a barbecue afterwards. He did say that there were people he wanted to introduce us to, but didn't elaborate. I was as nervous as if I was on my first date and Michael felt it. Don't worry, it's just a barbecue, not the Spanish Inquisition. That's easy for you to say. You haven't been on the receiving end of Michelle's acid tongue. She makes my mum sound like maladroit vituperation. I still bear the mental scars of our last meeting. Michael looked as though he wanted to ask me to repeat what I had just said as the door opened and I froze, like a deer caught in the headlights of a car. It felt like time had stopped right at that moment. Kelly, Michael, so good of you to come. Please come on in. Michelle stepped aside and beckoned, looking as gorgeous as ever. I still couldn't get over just how tall and elegant this woman was. I felt dwarfed beside her and yes, still very intimidated. As we walked through the lounge room, I stopped and gasped. There, taking up one whole wall, was the china cabinet that James had told me about. $5,000 was a bargain if I knew my furniture, which I did. Don't forget, I was once a shopping guru with Visa card credentials. Michelle's grinning face met me as I turned to her. You like? I walked over and went to touch it, but hesitated. It was solid timber, not your crappy compressed wood chip imitation stuff. The lead-like glass panels set it off just right. It's beautiful. I just love the wood carving, and it suites the room to perfection. I marveled. It's exquisite, beautiful. My plates were sitting center stage, with the one of James and Michelle together arm in arm taking pride of place. It was a larger serving platter-style plate, bigger than the rest. That plate was the one I thought of as my masterpiece. From there, flowing out either side and graduating smaller, were ones of James and Michelle individually, and then on the bride's side was James, Michelle, and my parents. On the other side beside James were the ones of his parents with the bridal couple, and on the outermost sides were the ones of his best man and Michelle's bridesmaid. I was amazed and speechless. I want to thank you for the wedding present. I was truly touched when I finally found out it was yours. I think something from the heart is so much more valuable than anything you can pick up at the shops. It shows a lot of love and thought. I just love sitting here and looking at it. I sometimes feel a little guilty for what I said to you that day at the courthouse. We've been complimented so many times on it, and it frustrated us that we couldn't tell anyone who sent it. I was wiping the moisture from my eyes. Please don't feel that way, Michelle. I deserved what you said and more. It certainly woke me up to just how stupid I was. I want to thank you for ripping my head out of my butt. You were right. It wasn't roses I was smelling. I didn't do this for any recognition at all. I did it because I felt I needed to and just hoped you would like it. Michelle touched my shoulder gently. Well, you got your wish, but now this is out in the open. We'll be letting everyone know who sent it. All our friends have been intrigued by this mystery. Now everyone's out the back. Come and I'll introduce you. As we emerged out the back, a chorus of cheers broke out. Congratulations. There were whooping and hollering from all parts of the backyard. I stood gobsmacked. I really thought I wouldn't know anyone apart from James and Michelle. And I didn't really know her apart from our meeting at the courthouse, and that was less than a stellar meeting. So to say this was a surprise was an understatement. Michael grinned at me. Well, you did want an engagement party. Well, here it is. I just stood there stunned, staring at Michael's smiling face. Inga? What? Engagement cum debut party, if I have any say in it. I spun to see James standing there with a big grin on his face. He walked over and gave me a big hug and kiss on the cheek. Congratulations on landing the fish, and welcome back from Hades. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. As I lowered my gaze, I could feel all eyes on me. I looked back over to Michael, worried what he may be thinking. I needn't have worried. His smile was still stretched across his face. Thank you, James. That means a lot to me. I said sheepishly. James shook Michael's hand. I still think you're an idiot as well for letting this minx trap you. Well, maybe you'll be a better man than me in keeping her in line. Michael grinned. Likewise, James. I think you'd have to be a simpleton not to be able to understand this wonderful woman. However, in your defense, I have to admit that you probably took the sting out of the scorpion's tail. I had so many emotions flooding my brain. I was feeling lightheaded and faint. I sat down, and that's when everyone started to file past. Both Michael and James wandered off to grab some drinks, now leaving me to wonder if I made a mistake in introducing them to each other. I understand I have you to thank for a certain front door surprise I got from Kelly the Auth. Michael's voice faded as they walked off. What happened to not bragging mates about their girlfriends? Then I realized that James would be the last person Michael would feel worried about. I can see James giving Michael the heads up when it comes to any slight disagreements we may be having in the future. Looks as though I won't be winning so many this time around. But hey, who cares? As long as we love one another, that's all that counts. By the time Mom and Dad came up to me, I had sneaking suspicion they may have been invited. Michael was back standing with a wine in one hand and a beer in the other. Both Mom and Dad gave me a hug, kiss, and congratulated us on our upcoming marriage. Dad admonished as he shook Michael's hand. "Don't you be making a habit of this, Kelly. This is the last damn time I walk you down the aisle. You can pay a drunken monkey next time if you intend to go for a third wedding." He winked at Michael with a smile on his face, showing us he was chiding me good-naturedly. "I promise, Dad. This one's the last if I have anything to say about it." Mom winked at me and dragged Dad away with an admonishment of her own. "If I hadn't gone for a third, I wouldn't have married you." Again, their voices faded as my attention was brought back to more people wishing us well. All my friends from work wanted to see my engagement ring, which I showed with great pride. I had no idea how all this was organized without me even having an inkling as to what was going on. Beverly winked at me and cackled her usual laughter. "First time I've seen you speechless without being down in the dumps, my dear." I smiled in wonder. Has everyone got an eye twitch today? More laughter broke out. Oh well, forgive me if I'm still trying to get past the fact that my Michael has seen fit to ask me to marry him. Then something came back to me. "Mike, you looked like you were going to ask me something at the front door. What was it?" Knowing full well what it was, Michael scratched his head a little embarrassed, and I had a sudden fright. He had looked sheepish at the front door when I said it, and it looked as though I was big-mouthing myself. Now I had put Michael on the spot, and if he took it the wrong way, then it could well make him feel slighted. He came out with it anyway. What does maladroit vituperation mean? I looked around at everyone, and there wasn't one person amongst the crowd of well-wishers who seemed to know what it meant. Just as I thought, and I could see the relief on Michael's face to know he wasn't the only one not to know. I looked over to Beverly and she cackled as usual, but yet again she could read me like a book. "You have an ulterior motive for asking, Kelly. I can see it in your eyes." I smiled and nodded. I didn't know what it meant either until you told me. I felt a fool for not knowing, although it's not a common expression. I let it slip at the front door, and Mike had that same look that signaled that he felt the same. "You're the crossword expert, so tell them all what it means." Everyone turned to Bev and waited. She smiled and shook her head. "So now you're embarrassing me. Touché, Kelly. Maladroit means lacking in skill, awkward, tactless, clumsy, and vituperation is verbal abuse, castigation, condemnation. Put together, it signifies someone's inept ability to put someone down verbally. Bit like a college English professor having a verbal slanging match with a Neanderthal." Michael started to smile and I had to say it. "Whatever you do, sweetheart, please don't tell Mom I said it." Michael burst out laughing, and everyone just stood there wondering what the joke was about. This awkward situation was defused by Thomas and Stephen racing up and jumping into my lap. "Happy engagement," they both sang. Then Steve frowned and almost strangled himself trying to ask his question. "What is engagement?" Tracy came up and whispered in his ear, and little Stevie's eyes popped wide open, and he slapped his tiny hands to his mouth. "Oh yucky, that's nah, Don wanna know." He jumped off my lap and disappeared into the crowd to the laughter from us all. I sat there for hours and watched everyone. I remembered the parties I had literally dragged James to, and this was nothing like them. While there were groups of people talking and laughing, they slid from one group to another, making small talk, flowing as smoothly as oil on water. I felt comfortable talking to each and every one of them, no one person being left out or excluded from the festivities. This was what James had tried to get me to understand all along. This was true friendship amongst all our friends. This was not little cliques of people spreading gossip about each other or harboring secrets. Even those that I thought of as James's friends were happy to finally meet the reformed Kelly Garrett, although they had the good grace and manners not to say it in those words. However, it was what James's father said to my mother that made me turn in astonishment. "You know, Marcy, you once said that James did well, trading a lemon in on 2 peaches. It now seems to me that bitter-tasting lemon has turned into some very delicious lemonade." I saw Mom standing there smiling and heard her reply, "Yes, Graham, I think you're right. All she needed was to find the right recipe." I walked off feeling smugger than I or two. That recipe was one that took a lot of heartache and tears to find. But then, I can guarantee it being one I will never ever forget. I lay in my wedding bed with my wonderful husband's powerful arms holding my body. I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment and peace, something I had never had before. I knew that it wasn't a condemnation of James, but the realization that I had found what a real marriage was all about. We made love. As we dropped off to sleep, I murmured, "Love me for the rest of my life, and I will return it tenfold. I'll see to it that all your wishes and fantasies come true." My mind wandered as sleep took hold. Another one of Beverly's statements was again proved correct. Most times helping others gains you 10 times the help back. I now know it also to be true. Loving someone gains you 10 times the love back. Michael drew me to him and kissed my forehead. "You won't have a thing to worry about, my love. I can see us growing old together with a tribe of grandchildren to bounce on our knees." I fell asleep secure in the embrace of my loving husband. What more could a woman want? Michael and I now have a pigeon pair, a boy named Michael James Kincaid and a girl named Sarah Michelle. Michael allowed me to name both. I may have lost James as a husband, but got him back as a pseudo-brother-in-law. Well, you see, Mom and Dad took to Michelle like a daughter since she doesn't have any family of her own. After having Dad walk both of us down the aisle, me twice, I suppose it was only natural. We now treat each other like sisters, and that goes as far as sibling fights and calling each other stupid names when we disagree. Michelle may no longer intimidate me. However, I do have an enormous respect for her. It turns out that while Michelle was fertile, there was something wrong and she couldn't bear her own children. She says with a slight grin that belies the vanity flowing from her, that there had to be something wrong with her. She just couldn't be that perfect. I smile and shake my head. Sarah donated the use of her uterus and services as surrogate mother to have Michelle's eggs fertilized by James, implanted, and bringing their twins, again one boy and one girl, into the world. Everyone thought it was a loving thing to do, and Sarah is the favored aunt with all our children. It has also brought Sarah, Michelle, and James closer as a family in their own right. With Trace and her brood, that makes camping holidays rather fun with 13 of us. 16 when Mom, Dad, and Sarah decide to join us, playing, laughing, and generally enjoying each other's company as good friends and family do. I have no idea what has become of the others, and nor do I care. I know it may sound selfish. However, I really don't care. I have now got what I really wanted all along, the perfect husband and family with a good selection of loyal friends. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.